After the First Matabele War of 1894, the British basically had control of all of Rhodesia. The Matabele, the native people in the area, had lost a lot of their land and people in the First War, including their capital, Bulawayo, and their king, Lobengula. The Matabele had a leader, but he was a rather weak one, and the Mlimo, the religious and spiritual leader of the people, held most of the power. In 1895, conditions were really bad, and to make matters worse, disease and famine were ravaging the people of Matabele land. The Mlimo decided the best course of action was to just expel the British from Rhodesia and retake their land. In early 1896, most of the British Rhodesian troops were down in South Africa, on the border with the Boer republics, to which the British relations were souring. So the Mlimo decided it was the perfect time to strike. The Mlimo managed not only to gather many Matabele warriors, but many Shona warriors too. The Shona people occupied Mashona land, in the north of what is now Zimbabwe. The Matabele plan was to slaughter all the British settlers that had moved to Rhodesia, and then retake their old capital, Bulawayo. In late March of 1896, the war started. The Matabele and Shona warriors began raiding ranches and white settlements, killing all the British people they could find. The main British defense force of Rhodesia was the native police, but many of them were Matabele or Mashona, and the Mlimo convinced many native police to join the rebellion against the British. By the beginning of April, over 200 settlers had been massacred by the Matabele. Frederick Seals, one of Rhodesia's most famous big game hunters, was one of the first to act against the Matabele. Seals was one of the first to realize it, and as the British lacked troops in the area, he gathered militias to combat the Matabele. He and his militia rescued the remaining Rhodesian settlers from their homes or ranches and brought them to Bulawayo, where the main defense was mounted. The Matabele ravaged the remaining countryside until Bulawayo and Fort Victoria, in northern Mashonaland, were the only obstacles in their way from rule over southern Rhodesia. And the British force wouldn't arrive for months. About 1,000 settlers, led in part by American scout Frederick Burnham and Frederick Seals, held the town of Bulawayo, surrounding it with tipped wagons and walls. Small groups of 40 settlers formed militias known as the Bulawayo Field Force. They rode out of Bulawayo and found food and harassed the Matabele. But over 10,000 Matabele warriors surrounded the town, and conditions quickly became dire. But the Matabele never made a main attack and focused on sniping the settlers. They never made a main attack because the first Matabele War was the first use of Maxim guns, and they were massacred by machine guns in the First War. And they were now afraid of making concentrated attacks, which was great for the settlers. The telegraph lines were still open in Bulawayo though, and in late May, Cecil Rhodes arrived with troops from Fort Victoria, and a large relief column of a few thousand arrived from the south, led by General Frederick Carrington. The relief force, with the help of the settlers, engaged the Matabele outside of Bulawayo, and by June, the warriors were forced out of the town and the settlers were liberated. 50,000 Matabele warriors from all over retreated to defensive positions on the Matobo Hills, and the British column couldn't get through. In June, a couple of small engagements happened in Mashonaland, near Harar, including a major engagement at Alice Mines. But nothing much happened, and the war was put into a temporary stalemate, with the British not able to advance into the Matabele defensive positions. But in late June, some secret agent stuff happened. Burnham, assisted by another guy named Armstrong, snuck into the main Matabele village and crept into the Mlimo's cave. The two waited until the Mlimo came in to go to bed and just shot him in the chest. They then jumped on their horses and fled, hundreds of warriors close behind with bullets and spears flying by them as they ran. They set the village on fire and escaped. With the Mlimo dead and the rebellion going nowhere, the remaining chiefs of Matabele land sued for peace, and the Matabele portion of the rebellion ended. But Mashonaland had not given up hope yet. After the attack on Alice Mines, they made similar attacks on Mazau and Fort Victoria, the latter failing horribly for them. But General Carrington moved up his forces and started making concentrated attacks. After a main engagement at Wedza and another at Salisbury, which is now Harar, in both of which the Shona warriors lost, the rebelling forces fled into the hills. Without centralized leadership, groups ranging from a couple dozen to a couple hundred warriors took up defensive positions in key towns and many kopjes. Kopjes are basically singular mountains or rock formations in the middle of a relatively flat area. These are great defensive positions during tribal wars, but to the British they were easy. Carrington moved his couple thousand troops from one isolated kopje to the next, mowing down their defenders with machine guns or making them crumble down with artillery. By 1898, all of the Mashonaland rebels were dealt with as well, and their stubborn leaders were forced to make peace. But there was one chief who survived. Shona chief Mapondera. After the war, Mapondera gathered followers and had 100 young warriors rebel with him against the British in 1901 in northern Mashonaland. The 100 warriors ambushed British patrols and settlers. This continued for about 2 years. During this time, many Shona warriors joined in, and by 1903, Mapondera had 600 warriors at his disposal. Sir William Henry Milton, the governor of Rhodesia at the time, did not want a repeat of the past two wars, and troops of the British South Africa Company came in and swiftly took out the rebels in one battle near Mount Darwin. Mapondera was captured and died soon after. And to prevent further rebellion, the British brutally oppressed the natives in the area for 50 years. And that was that.